All right, so we're going to get into Apricot University. We are continuing our on-page series today, still in the early stages of that. Today, we're going to be going into Entity SEO and what that actually means. So for those of you who aren't familiar with what Entity SEO is, it can be kind of hard to get your head around at first, but once you get it, it's kind of like, oh, that seems pretty obvious, actually, when I think about it. So with Entity SEO, we're basically talking about that as compared to like just optimizing for keywords. So when you look at a keyword is obviously just like a simple phrase, a couple of words. And back in the olden days of SEO, all it was really required to optimize for a keyword was to like include it on the page several times and get some variations and some related keywords on there. Now with Entity SEO, that's really come about with kind of the evolution of Google's algorithm and how its algorithm understands the language and the content that's on the page. So when you think about keywords versus entities, an entity can be anything. It can be a noun, a place, a person, a thing. It can be whatever. And a keyword is just one simple phrase, right? So think of entities like this. Entities are topics, and they are going to be like a keyword and how it relates to other keywords and other topics. So for example, let's look at the example, the Queen of England. That's the search term we're going to focus on. Queen of England is an entity. Now, content team. If you guys were given the assignment to rank a page for Queen of England, how would you optimize that page? Like, what would you include on the page?
I'll just jump in here. Directly answering questions like how old she is would be one, where she's born, history of her, that type of thing would be related to the Queen of
All right, England. So nice. So you're looking at the Queen of England as the specific person, correct?
Yes.
Okay, because this is where it gets kind of dicey, is like, because Queen of England could be multiple entities. It could be the person who's currently occupying that, which is Elizabeth II, or it could be like the role of the Queen of England, like the actual office of the Queen of England. And so in order to rank for that, you have to figure out how Google understands the entity and what it understands the entity as being. So for example, if you Google the Queen of England, and I'll just share my screen real fast here. This is the result that you get. So you Google Queen of England, you've not included any name whatsoever, but you get search results related to Elizabeth II, Elizabeth Windsor. And that's because Google, from its past experience with its users, understands that most of the users who are Googling that term are actually looking for information on this specific person rather than the role of the Queen of England or what the office actually is. And if you want that information, you actually have to modify your search and search for something that's like Queen of England explained, in which case you'll get more information on like what the role of what the Queen actually does. Whereas if you just Google Queen of England, you get a whole bunch of stuff that's specifically about Elizabeth Windsor, Elizabeth II. And so that's because Google has come to understand that the entity Queen of England, it has a relationship to Elizabeth II, which then has a relationship to like everything that's been in Queen Elizabeth's life. It's like who she's married to, who her kids are, where she went to school at, where she lives, all that stuff. All that stuff is wrapped into the entity of what is the Queen of England. It's the person, relationships to other entities, and so on and down the list. Is this making sense? So it's almost like you're looking at the entity as being the topic. Then how you optimize for that entity is making sure that you're including everything on your page that Google understands as being related to that entity. Does that make sense for everybody? Or anybody have any questions so far? All right. So whenever we're optimizing with Entity SEO in mind, that basically means that like for car accident lawyer, for example, it's not enough for us to just go into the page and be like, okay, I'm going to write a page for car accident lawyer. I need to actually, I can't just like, plug in my keyword a few times, plug in a few variations, plug in a few partials, get a couple of related keywords on there and I'm good. We actually need to stop and think about like, how does Google understand car accident lawyer or Austin car accident lawyer, Queens car accident lawyer, whatever location, like what does it understand that entity is being about? And so a good way to go about doing that then is to look at the top ranking pages for that term and look at the topics that are covered on that page. So if you Google like Austin car accident lawyer, for example, You know, you'd probably want to skip over like any kind of like directory results, like FindLaw and that kind of stuff, and like actually look at the actual law firm sites, because those are the ones we're really competing against, because they're ranking for similar reasons to what we would be able to do. But you'd want to look at those top ranking law firm sites, look at their page, and not just look at how it's optimized, but look at what the writing is about. Like, what kind of topics do they cover? You know, if you go onto the page and they're answering questions like what a personal injury lawyer does, if they've got information on there about Austin, Texas, or about their geo or whatever, those are all, if you see that pattern from ranking page to ranking page to ranking page to ranking page for that keyword, that probably tells you that Google regards Austin car accident lawyer as having a relationship to these other entities and other topics that are on the page, and therefore our page should have similar topics. Now, it's easy to go into this and just be like, I'm going to write a page for Austin car accident lawyer, and I'm just going to write about a bunch of stuff that makes sense to me from my gut level, and assume that it's going to rank because, like, hey, everything's on topic. But you might be making false assumptions in doing that if you don't do your research ahead of time and include stuff that Google either sees as being outside the entity or being irrelevant to the entity. So if you write a page and it's optimized really well, you know, it could be that your foundation for your SEO there, your on-page SEO, is actually missing some things, some important entities that should be in there. For example, about Austin car accident lawyer, if Google regards a section that's about different types of compensation as being essential to that entity, and you don't include it in your content, then you're missing a pretty big chunk of the entity, and therefore your page is not as relevant to that keyword as a different page that covered the entity more thoroughly or more correctly. Does that make sense? So basically, the idea here with Entity SEO is to make your page as relevant to the entity as Google knows the entity to be.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So with a specific example of Miami car accident lawyer, what would be some of the things that the writer should include in their content?
So for like it's definitely possible like Miami car accident lawyer would include different entity relationships than like Austin car accident lawyer. There's
Right.
it's a different state, different geo, all that stuff. So you'd expect some of that. The way you'd find that out, there's a couple different ways. One is to do the research manually, which is obviously very time consuming. And that would be to like do the search through Google, go to the ranking pages that are all law firm sites, and looking at what they wrote about. You know, what are the topics they covered? What's the actual content that they have? And then you kind of slip like a Venn diagram or a vector of like the top 10 ranking pages, for example, and find the topics that they all have in common that you see on there. And then those are the topics that you want to make sure that you then include in your page. Like, you want your page to be like the gestalt of like that Venn diagram, right? Now, there are tools that do this too, and some of them are better than others. I haven't found one that I'm 100% satisfied with. I'll show you guys the one that I'm currently tinkering around with. It's made by SEO Scout. We've also used like topical relevance, and there's one called wordgraph.io. Wordgraph.io just takes so long to load though. All right. So this is a scan I did for Austin Personal Injury Lawyer. This tool also lets you kind of plug in your URL to kind of compare your content, but we'll get to that in a minute here. So Austin Personal Injury Lawyer, this thing's going to tell you, like, you know, what the average word count is that it's seeing for those articles that are ranking for that. It's going to give you kind of a grade level as far as like the reading level of the content. So grade level 10. Writers, you guys already pay attention to this stuff. I think you guys shoot for like an 8th grade level. Is that correct? Writers?
Yes, that's
Could be
correct.
even less, 6th or 8th grade.
Yeah. So like this, it's like the tool here, you know, this is like the max level that we'd want to go for, basically. If you're under that, you're probably good. But as far as the entities go, so what this tool does is it pulls up the top 10 pages or so, and it finds that the identities that are included in the content, and so that's what the topics are here. Topics are the same thing as entities, basically. So, you know, it's found, you know, Texas accident lawyers. A lot of this stuff is going to be intuitive stuff that you expect to find on there. It's just that you want to kind of go through it all and make sure that you've definitely covered it on your page. So I can pull a complete list here. Sometimes you find stuff that's like, yeah, I would have written about that anyway, and it's kind of like it's obvious. And sometimes you find surprising stuff in there that you wouldn't have thought to put in there otherwise. Tool's going a little slow today. Yeah. So if we're writing this page, we want to make sure that we like all these keywords that show up as entities in here. These are all going to be things that you'd want to make sure that you find that you include in your content. And it even tells you like what sites it finds them on. So like find law results, we'd probably ignore those, but these are actual law firms, so therefore they're more important. But yeah, you can go through the list there. You can just make sure, and like so that's using the tool, and the tool just goes through and it scrapes them, and then it also finds like different questions that are commonly asked on those. So this one's pretty useful for like coming up with like FAQ content, for example. What is a personal injury lawyer? How long does a claim take? What is personal injury protection coverage? You can go through here and find out the exact questions that you should use for your phrase. Like a lot of these questions should look familiar. We cover these a lot, but it's possible we're using them on the wrong pages, whereas we should be using them on this page. So this kind of helps you narrow down, like, these are the actual questions that you should use for this exact keyword. All right, questions or thoughts so far? So like, for example, I plugged in so Slingshot Law is our client for Austin. So I plugged in our personal injury lawyer page into this one. And like our word count, we're at half the word count we should be at according to this tool, according to the rank, compared to the ranking pages. Our grade level looks good. We're under it. We're under the max, so we're good there. But our relevance, which is the content score, we are falling short on the entities that we need to have in there. So we're missing some of the entities that we need to get up to the ranking pages, basically. So does this make sense? Any questions so far? All right. So what do you guys think about this? Like, it seems pretty intuitive, and it all makes sense when you get your brain around it. The key difference between how we've always approached it to what actually needs to be done, I think, is just going out there and doing the research and making sure that the entity, the related keywords, and all that we're including in our content are the proper ones and not the ones that we just assume to be there. Anyone have any thoughts or questions?
Willie, are you going to get into siloing today, or how other pages relate to this?
That would probably, like the internal linking and the silo structure, we're going to do that for a separate call. We're already coming on the 8:30 mark, so.
Okay, sounds good.
Try to keep it short, sweet, and punchy, basically. All right, so what do you guys think about this? Does it, like, give me some feedback here.
Feels like it.
Does it seem like what you're already doing? Does it seem like it's close to what you're already doing? Like,
From an outsider's perspective, it seems like it's challenging to actually like get the content honed in to exactly what Google's looking for.
right.
Like,
That is definitely the challenge of Entity SEO. The last several updates that have come through Google have really honed in like how it understands content. Like the BERT update, especially from November of like, man, was that already almost 2 years ago, a year and a half ago now? The BERT update was probably the one that advanced the most forward this kind of stuff and how Google understands content.
So do we have like a systematic approach to content as far as, because content also has to be readable. Like it has to, like people have to like not feel like it's regurgitated like garbage, but it also has to like maintain the integrity that you're looking for when Google is scanning it. So like, do we have a systematic approach in our methodology with content, and like how many times we mention certain keywords, how many times, or like how long those pages are typically supposed to be, and so on?
Content.
Yes, we do. We usually have set. We're a little flexible now. Usually pages are more in the like, rather than 500 words, it's more like 400 to 600 kind of thing. At least for like our supporting pages. It depends on the page type, and we also have like set numbers of times that we're supposed to use the firm name and certain keywords and things like that. But that's kind of changing over time, especially as like for example, Google kind of understands location differently from what I understand. Like that's kind of changed over time. So the way we've done it have changed in the past couple months. But yes, we have some guidelines that we generally use.
Yeah, and I content can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think where our current optimization guidelines kind of fall short is that they're very much still oriented kind of around like use keyword X number of times, that kind of stuff. And that really isn't what it should be about. It should really be about, because entity SEO is really more about almost like writing naturally and making sure that you're creating content that is thorough and covers the entity in its entirety. So what we really should be doing, especially for like the best keywords, the VKWs, is going out there, looking at the ranking pages, kind of collecting, what's on those pages, what's actually being talked about, the content that's being covered, the topics that are being covered, finding that common ground that's on all the ranking pages, and then making sure that we include that in ours. So this is basically how you would go about mapping out your page and what you're going to write about, is basically what it comes down to. And it's still important to have all those exact match keywords, partial match keywords, all that stuff needs to be worked in there. That's still extremely important, but it's really about like what we're talking about in the context of those keywords and making sure that it makes sense within the context of what Google understands the entity to be about. So you can't just go in there and like, I'm going to use X keyword, Y number of times and write about whatever. I think it's going to be fine. You need to write about X keyword, Y number of times within the context of content that Google thinks is relevant to that entity. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, that does make sense, Willie. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I don't know. I was going to ask another question, like more in regards to like, okay, so entity SEO, essentially you're trying to like pull out like a little bit of uniqueness about the whatever you're talking about, right? So like in our approach, like how much do they factor in anything like personality, like, or like even like cuss words or like things like that you don't know?
What do you mean by personality?
Like meaning like if you had a lawyer that was a little more crass and said, the F word on like their car accident page in like a moderately playful type of way, is that page going to get like dinged for profanity or something like that? Or do they take into account like, oh, this is just like a crass lawyer, or like this is somebody writing unique content? Like we don't see this.
If you start getting into like X-rated content, then yeah, it's probably going to have an impact on it. Now, if you're just like, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I wouldn't do anything explicit like that. That's not, because the whole thing behind the entity SEO is also machine learning, the rank brain stuff. So it's building relationship, how it takes multiple different locations, your location, your past history, a little personalization, and comes up with the SERP essentially. But I'm seeing like a common theme from what I've been doing this week of what certain entities are and what should be on the page as far as a page template. As long as you follow that, we should be good. And it's also good with rank brain, you need to have exact match keywords a little bit and the variations like I think you guys are doing. But again, it's all about natural language processing, which is through rank brain. And I wouldn't do anything crazy as far as language goes with that, because they might just ignore your page if they see profanity on it, and might get negative reviews or a negative comment. So you don't want to have that on your page.
Yeah, exactly. Well said, Jim.
It could also be filtered out from safe search, I think, if it goes far enough.
Yeah, so you gotta be trying to create a character and all that. That's great for your branding and all, but yeah, it might hurt you in the search.
One thing you can do is just you can be a little bit more liberal and call to action on your metadata. So page style, like you'll see like a lot, like free consultant, like the word free, right? It resonates with somebody and distinguishes yourself away from the SERP. From what I'm seeing, like for the Miami search lawyer thing, I just quickly did it, and one guy had like Miami car accident lawyer, but free consulting. That triggers in a human mind, hey, it's free. Let me go and check that out, because they see the word free. So that's something to consider. So you have a little bit more liberal in the page title to get a call to action or to drive traffic to your page. So areas like the page title and the meta description can help drive that to be a little bit more liberal.
I guess from like a more of a sales perspective, like how do we talk through, like we're writing content for all of our law firms and we have the same content writers writing similar content for personal injury law firms all across the country. So how do we differentiate, like when we're talking to a law firm, how do we be like, hey, your personality is going to shine here?
Well, I mean,
It's
I don't know that
TikTok.
Go ahead, Jim.
It's called TikTok, social media. That's where they can shine. They have special channels. I have worked with TikTok. I spoke to TikTok. They reach a certain audience. If it skews younger, that's a place to be. So if you want to share, honestly, if they want their personality to show, that's the areas to do. Instagram, TikTok, that's the where you can get a little short video, gets their personality, get them out there, and then have a link to their website that actually shows how knowledgeable they're at about the subject. So that's the way to do it, is focus more on that type of areas of social media
Basically,
to drive their
keep your-
personality.
Keep your website vanilla.
Yes.
Well, no, Derek. I mean, not like 100% vanilla, because we do have a process for bringing in that law firm's kind of tone and perspective into the writing.
Design kills it on that front. I do feel like we manage that part of it. You know, like I think we have the best designs in the industry. I'm speaking mostly from a content perspective, as far as like, and in full disclosure, I don't read a lot of the content on our sites because it doesn't interest me. But
Yeah, from a ranking perspective, we do our thing, and we kind of, like, through these workshops, we're giving Google what it wants and ranking that way. But from a conversion perspective, where we have to sort of paint the law firm in a certain way or make them unique from other law firms, I think we also have a process for that. But they're two separate things a little bit. But maybe you want to talk to that content team, like Spencer or Caitlin, who are here today, about like making it personalized a little bit for the law firm.
Sure. We actually have been doing some custom pages. So what we've been doing is we'll send out these, not a set questionnaire, but we'll have, a certain number of questions that are like, how comfortable are you with putting pricing information on your website? Or what are some things that you want clients to know about you that isn't really on the website, or that we might not know yet? Things like that makes it a little more unique. So we're actually, talking to the clients and getting a little bit more information so that we can make these pages a little more distinct from just, basic information about how to get in contact with a lawyer. So.
Now, all that stuff is kind of like separate from the entity SEO. That's not really what we're talking about. Like, it's like, but just to be clear, like, writing for the entity doesn't mean you can't include anything else on your page. So you're still able to do that and include all those conversion elements that you think are going to help, like, your brand and that kind of stuff.
So in regards to personal injury law firms, when you say entity SEO, like what exactly does that mean? Like what, meaning like personal injury is the entity?
Yeah. So like, whatever keyword you want to rank for, there's an entity. It's not like, there's the keyword Austin Personal Injury Lawyer, for example, but then there's also the entity Austin Personal Injury Lawyer, and the entity is like going beyond just the keyword and examining its relationships to other keywords and making sure that those topics are included on the page. So in some ways, it's kind of like, it's basically what it really boils down to is figuring out like what the correct related keywords are that you need to write about on your page, and making sure that you're understanding what's important to that keyword in the way that Google understands what is important to that keyword, and not just guessing.
Gotcha.
Yes. So like exactly would be like under personal injury lawyer, what is under, would you classify as like being personally? So like one of the things that a relationship would be, like back is usually one of the bigger ones out there, like back injuries, other things, different types of personal injuries that could be entities under personal injury. So
Right.
you're just taking another step lower of the topical. So it's like a library. You have history. Okay, what do you want? German history, European, early American. You're taking a little bit of a deeper dive as an entity and explaining it more.
So like, for example, going back to our original example of the Queen of England, related keywords to Queen of England would be stuff like, Elizabeth Windsor, Prince Philip, Buckingham Palace, Meghan Markle, Prince Harry, Kate Middleton. So those are all things that Google is you want to verify it, but those are all related keywords that have a relationship to your original keyword, and therefore are going to be part of its entity. Does that make sense? So it's all about relationships and making sure that you've got the correct relationships that you're covering in your content to make your page as relevant as possible to your original keyword. It all comes back to relevance. You're trying to include content on your page that makes your page more relevant to your keyword and your entity than anyone else's. So which is why you need to hone down and drill down on like what Google understands that to be about, because if you diverge from what Google understands it to be about, you're making your page less relevant.
So to be specific about what we're doing, we write a page that starts with an introduction, kind of defining what a car accident lawyer is or does, or how to get in touch with one. And then we'll talk about typical injuries that happen in car accidents, typical ways people have accidents, like different kinds of accidents. We talk about the steps that you need to take, or like what's going to happen if you've been in an accident, you go to the hospital and you have to, the insurance, you know, how to deal with the insurance company. You have to get a police report. You should have someone take pictures of the scene. You should, you know, steps to take. I mean, what else falls under that for that one specific phrase?
Right. And the extra step that we're not taking right now, like that's the step that we kind of do right now. But the extra step we don't do is go out there and look at the ranking pages and making sure that we're kind of like eliminating the ones that we aren't seeing on those ranking pages and adding the ones that we don't have on our list, you know? So going out there and figuring out, because that's how you figure out what's relevant, what Google thinks is relevant to the entity, is going out there and seeing what's ranking.
So like, for example, in Miami, there might be a different statute of limitations, or there might have been an accident that happened in Miami that became a big case, and the particulars of that case were important and have become important to the law, or insurance companies referring to a particular case on their websites. I mean, like, all that stuff can be specific to that one location.
Right.
So how do we address that internally? Like when we're looking at these sites in different markets, is that something that
we need to adjust the content? Like basically what we have to do, like, so like for example, say we've got a site that's been struggling on its keyword, and we decide, and we've been building links to it. They're all good links, high DA, right anchor text, all that stuff. And so we've been building links to it and it's not moving. That might lead you to believe that there's a problem with the on-page SEO, because that's the foundation of everything, right? If your content's not relevant enough, you can send all the links you want in the world to it, and it's probably not going to move very much. So then we'd probably want to go back and, you know, reevaluate the content. Maybe go and look at the ranking pages for that keyword, figure out what they're talking about, comparing to what we have on our page, remove stuff that's not that's on our page, that's not on the ranking pages, add stuff to our page that's on the ranking pages that's not on our page. Basically just readjust and like making sure that we are what the topics that our content is covering align more closely to the topics that are ranking.
That makes sense. It's good for me to understand that, because we lose business or don't get business because of local SEO companies, and a lot of lawyers are like, we need somebody local. And I guess under that pretext, I would understand why they would say that, if it added relevance to have somebody know and understand what was happening locally with laws, car accidents, things that surrounded that kind of stuff. So I guess I want to make sure, like, because a lot of our clients come from local SEO companies and that said they could do something that they couldn't do. So like, how do we operate differently and make sure we're relevant in their local markets? So that's important.
Yeah, I mean, relevance is one of the pillars of SEO. So the name of the game here is making our page as relevant as possible to how Google understands that entity to be about, that topic to be about.
It's good to know.
So, Willie, I have a question specifically insofar as it relates to custom BKW pages, because, you know, last month we kind of had a workshop over this in content, and we kind of realigned like the way we were looking at these. We definitely wanted to look at it from more of like with an emphasis on conversion, you know, like laying out the features and benefits of the site.
Yeah.
And so, for example, I'm looking at like the notes that we have from that, and one of the bullet points I have is that the point of these pages is not to inform or educate. It is to highlight the benefits of working with the firm, the problems it solves, etc. As necessary, offer information incidentally as you explain the benefits. So that to me seems, and this is why I want to get it right, because I know we've been working on this a lot. That to me seems a little bit contradictory with some of the aims of Entity SEO. How do we kind of rectify these like tensions where we're trying to work on converting the client who actually gets on the page, and then also kind of like satisfying the informational background that Google needs to make sure that, you know, it's popping up in the SERP?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. I'm glad you asked it. It's definitely true that when you're writing content for SEO, sometimes that gets in the way of conversion, because the stuff that Google wants to see isn't always the stuff that somebody who's going to convert is looking for, you know? So this is a good question. All right, there are a couple of ways we could go about this. One is to kind of get creative here and kind of like, it kind of comes down to what's in your topic list, what's in the list of entities we need to include. Like there may be ways to take those entities, talk about them, but spin them in a way that makes sense for conversion. Like for example, if we go to our entity list, our topics, and there's stuff in there about like different types of damages or compensation, we can definitely work that into a BKW page in a way that's conversion focused, but still cover the entity in a way that's less informational. Does that make sense? And then another way to do about it is a bit sneakier, but like, so we have like on a custom BKW page, it's gonna be laid out more like a home page at the top. There's gonna be a few rows that are kind of meant towards like, they're gonna be focused on conversion and selling the benefits of the firm. But then below that, we could do a more traditional content block that then covers those more informational pieces that are going to be less relevant to the conversion aspects. Because the whole idea here is that as users on the website, they tend to fall off the more they scroll down. So as long as our first, like our ATF and then our first few BTF rows are focused around conversion, they'll see those parts we want them to see before they would fall off and hopefully convert. Whereas the crawl bot, the crawl bot won't necessarily crawl the entire page all the time, but it will probably get around, especially if it's an important page in the top nav. It's one of your most important pages in the site it's getting linked to all the time. It'll crawl through all that content eventually, So we don't necessarily have to have that stuff front and center in the conversion oriented part of the page. We can still work it in down below if we need to. But my option A would definitely be finding ways to spin it so that it works to our advantage and we can put it in the kind of those primary rows. But anything that just can't be worked in, we can still put in like a text area down below to make sure we've got all our bases covered.
Okay. Yeah, I think that seems like a pretty good solution. Yeah, we should probably follow touch back on this because I know we're planning to do a lot of those pages this quarter in content. So we could go over that and see how we're like, balancing kind of those two ideas.
Yeah, it is a very valid point and an excellent question because SEO can sometimes fight with conversion. And it definitely does in this case, in some cases. I mean, it depends on what's in your topic list, but it definitely can and probably will.
Okay. Thanks.
Anybody else?
Also, is that tool free, that SEO Scout? Is that something that we have access to?
It's not free. We haven't bought it all the way just yet. I'm still kind of playing around with it. Like, I'll let you guys play around with it and see if you like it or not. I'll give you the login credits and you guys play with it and see if you find it useful or not. I've found hit and miss on it so far.
Okay. Yeah, because I think sometimes what I'll do is like I'll go manually and look at some of the high ranking pages, or I could go through like SEMrush and see like what the keywords that our competitors are ranking for and think about it from that way. But this seems like an easier way to think about the entities themselves rather than like the keywords, maybe.
Yeah, and the thing with doing it that way too, using those tools, so they're probably giving you the results for the entire domain. And here we really want to just focus on like what's on the ranking pages.
Yeah. Okay.
So doing the manual research, doing it manually, it can be time consuming, kind of coming up with that Venn diagram where you're trying to find all the things in common. So it'd be great if we could find a tool that works well. I'm still trying to find one that doesn't take like 3 hours to load the information in, but it's very thorough.
We got to create it.
There you go, Sarah. That's your next project. All right. Anybody have any other questions? Any final thoughts here before we close out? Good talk today. All right, guys. Think you have anything to add, Tom?
No, that was pretty thorough.
Oh, that was great and thorough. Thank you, Willie.